All right, can everyone hear me? Yeah, perfect. Cool, so my name's Kurt. I'm one of the co-founders at Rhinestone. So today I'm going to be giving mostly a talk, but at the end I'll give a short demo so you can see exactly what I'm talking about in action. But the main focus is going to be the announcement of a new product we've been working on with Safe. We've been co-developing what we call the Safe 7579 adapter. 7579 might mean something to you if you have been following the modular account abstraction space, but I'm going to dive into exactly what this is and focus on what we call at Rhinestone Permissionless Smart Account Innovation, and in the second half I'll get into the actual product that we've been working on with Safe. Cool, so I think like if you're here at SafeCon, like most of this should be relatively straightforward. So smart accounts do deliver superior UX. However, there are a bunch of challenges that we run into with smart accounts, and in particular here I'm talking about monolithic contract accounts rather than modular, and I'll get into modular in a second. But the key shortcoming of monolithic accounts is the lack of customization. So if you're a developer, you have a certain account feature in mind that you want to build into that account, then you need to fork an existing implementation, you need to have that contract re-audited, and then launch that account. The downstream impact is that this leads to a second account implementation out in the wild, which can lead to vendor lock-in for users and developers. This ultimately leads to fragmentation of the ecosystem because developers need to choose, well, which account implementation do I want to support, and can also lead to fragmentation of users' assets as they consistently onboard into new accounts when they discover new applications that support different account implementations. And so all of this just leads to a shit ton of duplicate work, not only for developers, but also for auditors. And so quite obviously, modular account abstraction or modular smart accounts is the answer, but the infrastructure is still lacking. So in particular, just because we have modular accounts and we have modules, doesn't mean that these modules work across all these different modular account implementations. So we require standardization, or in some cases, different components that act as translation layers between these different accounts. The second is security. So if you're a developer and you want to use a module, a component built by another developer, you need to know that you can trust that module and that it's not going to rug your users. Modules have root access on the account, and therefore security is paramount to get right. Modularizing the account does introduce more complexity. The upside here is that this complexity can be abstracted away from developers with the right tooling and services that allows module developers to focus on, well, what is the feature that I need to build to unlock a specific product experience for my users? And then finally is accessibility. You shouldn't have to be an amazing Solidity developer in order to access the power of modular account abstraction, and nor should you be a sophisticated user to interface with these modules through like a UI and extend the feature set of your smart wallet. And so just briefly on Rhinestone, we're working across all those 4 elements that I just mentioned. We sit at the intersection of module developers, application developers being dApps and wallets, and we work in partnership with the account vendors, and we make smart accounts fully extensible, portable, and secure. And so how we like to talk about it is that we transform smart accounts into an open platform for innovation. And the metaphor, even though it is like quite ambitious, that we continue to come back to is that we believe that modular smart accounts and unlocking an open ecosystem of modules on top of these accounts is the App Store moment for smart accounts, and is the unlock for developers to truly start to use the programmable validation and programmable execution of smart accounts to build truly novel product experiences. So in terms of what we need to unlock this open ecosystem of modules, it really starts with account and module interoperability, and that's going to be the focus of the latter half of this presentation. But security and simplifying the distribution, discovery, and monetization of modules is also paramount to having a vibrant ecosystem on top of these smart accounts. So diving into interoperability and the need for standardization. I think it's pretty obvious why we need standardization. First of all, it prevents vendor lock-in for users and developers. If you're building with a certain implementation, you want to know that you can service other account types that are out there to increase your audience, essentially. So to maximize the distribution for developers building on whether it's safe, autonomy, or zero dev, you know that if someone turns up to your application with a certain account, you can still service that user. And then for users, the flow-on effect there is that accounts become very portable across any application that's built with any specific smart account implementation in mind. And so this is when I'd like to introduce ERC 7579. So before ERC 7579 at Rhinestone, we were building execution managers that sat between these different account types, so that if a developer built a module, we could translate that module in the correct fashion so that it could be used with all these different accounts. However, this created a fair amount of complexity within our tech stack. It also introduced gas fees when using these modules with different account flavors. And to be frank, there were still module types that we were not able to make compatible across all the different account vendors that were out there. So we initially wrote quite a long-form document that detailed all the things that account vendors, the ones listed here, could do to make their account more compliant or compatible with other account vendors out there. And this essentially became ERC 7579, and we co-authored it with those account vendors, autonomy, zero dev, and OKX. And I know what you might be thinking. This sounds a little bit familiar. There has been a standard out there that is focused on modular account abstraction, or modular smart accounts in particular. So let me talk a little bit about why ERC 7579 is different. And to be honest, it is very simple. ERC 7579 is the most minimal standard that we think is required in order to have module interoperability across these different account flavors. And importantly, what this does is it allows account vendors to continue to compete and innovate and explore different paradigms whilst not violating the interoperability of these modules across the ecosystem. So all it does is it defines execution behavior, account and module config, module types, which is the most novel element of the ERC, and then obviously the interfaces. So yeah, I mean, from my prior slides, this is probably pretty obvious, but the upside here is that if you're building a module for a specific account vendor in mind, and you're building it with 7579 as like your template and your approach, then this module will work across all these different account vendors. But even more than that, if you're building very opinionated products that utilize specific modules, whether this could be automated DeFi strategies, it could be certain security products that are delivered via the wallet through modules, then they will also work across all these different vendors. So yeah, so getting into what we've been working on with Safe, the clear name that's missing from the ERC 7579 slide that I mentioned earlier is Safe. And so we've been working on what we call the Safe 7579 adapter. And this essentially allows the Safe to become compliant with 7579. And so maybe just to talk about Safe and why we think this partnership is so important between the standard and Safe. Well, first of all, Safe was a true trailblazer when it comes to modular accounts. They were very prescient in 2019 when they took this approach, and they've defined a lot of the concepts that we're continuing to extend within the wider modular account abstraction ecosystem. So for example, the idea of executor modules, we call them in 7579, are called safe modules in the Safe ecosystem. Guards in the Safe ecosystem we call hooks. These allow for different conditions and functions to hook into the execution pre and post and essentially enforce different conditions against that execution. But the most important thing is that Safe had this concept of a fallback handler, and the fallback handler essentially, if a certain function or an interface is not compatible with the Safe, then it falls back to these fallback handlers and loops through them. And this allows for the Safe to be infinitely extensible or future-proof, essentially. So given 7579 is so minimal, we're able to compact it into what is essentially a module, but we're calling it an adapter, and it sits on the safe as a fallback handler. Yeah, so that's the safe 7579. And so what does this mean for the safe ecosystem? Why should I care about safe 7579? I think some of these are probably pretty obvious from what I mentioned on prior slides, but maybe just to rehash, but some are new. So first of all, there are a bunch of modules that are being built in the 7579 ecosystem that safe developers will be able to access at launch of the safe 7579, that are being built in the ERC 7579 ecosystem. They'll be available at launch of the 7579 adapter. But even more than that, the safe doesn't have modular validation. And so with the safe 7579 adapter, you can now access this modular validation, and you can use modules such as passkeys, session keys, or different validation schemes against the account. And we believe that this will unlock a whole new set of product use cases that developers will build on top of. The second is increased TAM. So Safe has over 7 million accounts. They have over 100 billion in TVL. And obviously that is a huge draw card for Safe developers. But there is another emerging ecosystem that developers should be able to access. And that is the one that's starting to kick off around 43.7. And in particular, we have ZeroDev, Biconomy, who make up another 3.5 million accounts. OKX is building a smart account for their users that will be 7579 compliant. And there are many more account vendors that are looking at this standard to enter this ecosystem. The third is increased safe portability. And as a user, like this is something that I experience, not just because of what we're talking about today, but because of a lack of adoption of 12.7.1. But as a user, I want Safe to be maximally portable across all these different applications and use cases that are emerging. And this is one avenue to continue to increase the use cases that Safe will have across the ecosystem. And then the final one, which I want to dive into a little bit deeper, is there's a set of tools that are emerging for the ERC 7579 ecosystem. A lot of this tooling is being built by us at Rhinestone, but there are developers that are looking at this ecosystem as a way to essentially build their own products and offer different services to these account vendors and developers. And through Safe 7579, you as Safe developers can now access this tooling. And so the first one I already mentioned is access to modules that are out there in the ecosystem that you can already reuse and remix to build the products that you want to offer to your users. At the launch of Safe 7579, we'll have 12 to 14 modules. Most of these have been built by us at Rhinestone, but also contributed to by ZeroDev and Biconomy. And just to highlight a few, I already mentioned passkeys. Session keys are a huge unlock in many different ways, but essentially they are ephemeral keys that allow dApps to request scope permissions from users. Social recovery, MFA is a really interesting one that we personally built. And the idea here is that the validator is a multiplexer, so it allows you to combine and mix different validation schemes to essentially create a multisig that is not just EOAs, but could also be passkeys. It could be ZK email, like what Vitalik mentioned earlier. It could also be that the MFA is only triggered upon certain conditions. So maybe it's only when you're transferring an ERC20 balance above a specified amount that this multisig kicks in. So there's some super interesting stuff that's being built as like what we call these like starter set of modules. And there's also some more advanced stuff that is coming out that we think developers are going to find really novel product use cases to build with these modules. To highlight a few, scheduled orders or scheduled transfer is essentially a core executor module that can be used to create DeFi automations, especially when you start to combine it with session keys and relay services that kind of listen to off-chain events. You have another novel one is the ownable executor. Essentially, this allows you install this executor on a safe, and you can delegate controls to another account. So you could essentially have an organization that has a main safe with the treasury, rather than splitting off the treasury into different sub-accounts and delegating it to sub-DAOs, you can keep it all within one treasury, but delegate certain spending limits, if you will. So yeah, some really interesting concepts that will be coming to market, and there'll be many more as developers start to build modules and think about smart accounts as a distribution platform to other developers in the ecosystem. Cool, so I wanted to focus on interoperability, but I think it's really important to talk about security because it is something that when people look at ERC 7579, they say, well, what are you doing about security? And security is an area where we think there needs to be a lot more research, a lot more discovery and exploration around how to approach this. And one thing that we've been particularly focused on at Rhinestone is this idea of a module registry. And essentially all this is it's a way to delegate trust to entities that can essentially audit and secure and provide safety for users. And so the concept is really simple. We actually took inspiration from the EAS, but essentially the module registry is a singleton. It has what we call attestation schemas. These schemas define data structures, and these data structures essentially describe the different security properties of modules, but they could describe anything. And then there's resolver contracts which govern these schemas. And so the combination of these two means that anyone can set up a sub-registry within the module registry that might have different opinions about what is secure and what is not secure, or maybe you have a set of applications that are building for degens that have like lower security needs than a set of institutions that have a really high bar when it comes to security. And the best thing about this is you can create these sub-lists, if you will, without fracturing the liquidity of modules, without disrupting the interoperability and fluidity of these modules across the ecosystem, and most importantly, without fracturing the liquidity of attestation data, which is so important when it comes to securing users. So that's like the high level. I'm happy to take questions on that after the talk. And the final thing is distribution and discovery. So obviously when this launches and we have 12 to 14 modules, there's not much need for a discovery platform. But as developers continue to come up with more novel use cases around how modules can be used to drive different features at the product level or to distribute different services directly to users' accounts, we do think that there'll be a need for what we're calling the module store for developers, and potentially even an interface within wallets that allows users to browse and discover modules that might be paired with certain UI components or off-chain services. Cool. So that completes the presentation component of today's workshop. I'm going to go through a really quick demo to show the Safe 7579 adapter in use. And this was built by Zenguard, so a huge thanks to that team for being like an early adopter and giving us feedback on what we've built so far. But it's going to be a really simple demo. Essentially, I'm going to spin up a safe. Actually, I've already spun it up, but I'm going to initialize the Safe 7579 module as a fallback handler, and then I'm going to introduce a passkey module which was built by ZeroDev and essentially bypass the EOA signature requirement via this module. Cool, so I'm going to dive in. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, perfect. All right, so this worked both times when I tried this morning. So fingers crossed we don't have any problems today. Okay, so as you can see, I've spun up a safe. It's on testnet. I filled it with some ETH. I'm going to head over to apps. I'm going to go to my custom apps. And I've got the Safe Passkey app here. So I'm going to click on this app. I'm going to open the Safe app. And then essentially I'm just going to go through the flow, and I'm going to add a passkey as a validator to the account. So here I'm just going to set up a passkey that I previously set up within the keychain of Apple's keychain. Cool, so now I'm going to go back and just move through the steps. So here it's just, the UI is just informing the user what is actually going to happen to the configuration of the account. So I'm going to prove this. I'll show you in the transaction what's actually going on. So I'm going to add that passkey. Okay, and so first of all, the safe 7579 is both being added as a safe module and as a fallback handler to essentially create compliance between the safe and ERC 7579. I'm going to initialize the account, and then I'm also going to add the passkey module from ZeroDev. So I'm going to approve this with my EOA. All right, so that's all gone through successfully. I'm now just going to hit continue. Cool, so now you can see within this app, I have essentially got access to the safe via a passkey, and I'm just going to submit a transaction. The safe 7579 module or adapter is also 437 like native. Today, we're using Pimlico's bundler and paymaster, so you'll see that there is no gas when submitting these transactions. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to transfer the full amount that's in the account. And I'm going to send it back to myself. So now I sign with my passkey. Perfect, so it's gone through in the app. There has been issues with Safe's indexer, so I really do hope that we can see this in the transactions. Usually I have to toggle this. Great. So you can see here, we've transferred the full amount using a passkey validation mechanism that was introduced via the Safe 7579 adapter and using a module that was initially built for the kernel for ZeroDev under the ERC 7579 standard. And obviously, we've got 437 under the hood to abstract away gas for the user. So yeah, that concludes the demo. Obviously, it's a super simple showcase, but hopefully you can see that this does open up a huge amount of composability on top of the safe across the two ecosystems. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot. I'm not sure if we have too much time before the next one. Yeah, go on.
Any questions?
Thank you for the presentation. This is Vikas from LISC. I have a question for community-led modules. Let's suppose some developer develop some modules. So what will the process of like adding it in the module store? Like how it's going to end?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So one thing I didn't talk about is Module Kit. So we built a framework for building modules. It's an abstraction library that helps you build, test, and deploy. It has a bunch of template frameworks and obviously testing frameworks as well. So this is to help you get through the process of making sure that your module is compliant with ERC 7579, and you can run those tests with simple commands against all the different account flavors. The second phase is getting an attestation made and getting on the module registry. So today that process is, to be honest, it's quite manual. So you would reach out to us. We would coordinate with you and an auditor to kick off that audit process. And the process of having an attestation made at the moment is you essentially go under a pretty standard audit. However, we do supply essentially what makes up that data schema to the auditor. And after completing the audit, after completing the remediation, the auditor then supplies that data to be put on chain as well as their cryptographic signature, and then we place the attestation on chain. In the future, we plan on streamlining this process completely through a developer portal, etc. Because obviously there are things you want to do beyond just getting on the registry. You want to manage the metadata. You might want to manage pricing if you're monetizing that module, etc. You're welcome.
All right. I think we have space for one more question. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Check out the QR code. If you have any questions or you want to talk to me after I leave, then feel free to come and approach me. Thank you.